Sandra, a dedicated financial analyst living in Houston, Texas, had recently received a promotion that she was eager to share with her husband, Mark, and her mother-in-law, Mrs. Davis, on what was supposed to be a joyous occasion, their third wedding anniversary. She envisioned a celebratory dinner filled with laughter, smiles, and toasts to her success. Instead, what transpired shattered her expectations and left her reeling. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the elegant restaurant was filled with soft lighting and the gentle clinking of glasses, creating a festive ambience. Sandra took a moment to appreciate the scene, feeling grateful for her hard work that had finally paid off. She turned to her husband and mother-in-law, her heart racing with anticipation, and prepared to announce her promotion to senior financial analyst. "Mark, Mrs. Davis," she began, her excitement bubbling over, "I have some fantastic news. I've been promoted to senior financial analyst." The words hung in the air, and she anticipated applause, cheers, or at least congratulations. Instead, silence engulfed the table, and Sandra felt a chill run down her spine as Mrs. Davis's expression darkened. "Is this what we raise him for?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. To be overshadowed by his wife's career? Stunned by her reaction, Sandra blinked in disbelief. She had expected pride or at least a hint of happiness, but instead, it felt like she had committed a grave offense. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a flicker of conflict in his eyes as he attempted to support Sandra. "Mom, it's great news for Sandra. We should celebrate her achievement," he said weakly, but his lack of conviction was evident. Mrs. Davis continued, her tone sharp. "What about starting a family? Do you think a promotion can replace the joy of children?" Anger surged within Sandra as she took a deep breath, striving to maintain her composure. "I believe I can balance both my career and family," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. Mark avoided her gaze, looking down at the table. "Sandra, maybe we should consider what Mom is saying," he murmured, his voice cold and distant. Sandra's heart sank. This wasn't the supportive partner she had believed she married. "I can't just quit my job to satisfy your mother's expectations," she retorted, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I deserve respect for my hard work." Tension filled the air, and Sandra could feel the eyes of other diners on them. Mark's demeanor shifted, and she saw the frustration building within him. "You're being unreasonable, Sandra. You're my wife, not my competitor. Why can't you see that?" His words struck her like a physical blow, more painful than any assault. "This is not a competition, Mark. I'm trying to share my success with you," she exclaimed, her voice trembling as tears began to well in her eyes. Mrs. Davis leaned in closer, narrowing her eyes. "You need to think about what's best for our family, not just your career ambitions." Feeling trapped, Sandra's emotions boiled over. "This is who I am, and I won't give it up. Not for anyone." The words escaped her mouth, fueled by anger and desperation. She was fighting for more than just her career. She was fighting for her identity. Suddenly, Mark stood up, tension radiating from him. "You don't get it, do you? You're putting your career above everything else. This is what marriage is about. Sacrifice." In that moment, Sandra recognized the profound influence his mother had on him, twisting his views of their marriage into something suffocating. They had always been a team, but now she felt like an outsider in her own life. "Sacrifice shouldn't mean losing yourself," she shot back, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I deserve to have my dreams too." The argument escalated until, in a shocking moment, Mark raised his hand and struck her across the face. The sound echoed through the restaurant, silencing nearby conversations. As she fell to the floor, shock and disbelief washed over her. Time stood still. She couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. The sting on her cheek was a physical reminder of the betrayal she felt from the man she loved. As tears streamed down her face, she realized that this was a pivotal moment, a turning point that shattered the trust she once had in Mark. Pushing herself up from the floor, Sandra felt a surge of determination within her. She could not let this define her. She would not be a victim. The evening that began with excitement had descended into chaos, and she understood that this was more than just an argument. It was a wake-up call, urging her to break free from the chains of expectations and start living for herself. As she left the restaurant, a tumult of emotions swirled inside her: anger, fear, and a flicker of hope. It was time for change, and she was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The cool night air hit her face, grounding her in reality as she stumbled to her car, her heart racing and her mind overwhelmed by the events of the evening. Driving home, she replayed the confrontation in her mind, grappling with disbelief. The man she loved had struck her, and his mother's influence had turned him against her. She felt lost, like a ship adrift at sea, reflecting on their life together and the dreams she had once held dear. Arriving home, silence engulfed her like a thick fog. She dropped her keys on the table and sank into a chair, still in shock. The walls seemed to close in around her, amplifying the faint sound of her heartbeat in her ears. Pulling out her phone, she stared at the screen, noticing the absence of any messages from Mark. No apologies, no concern, nothing. Desperate for support, she called Rachel, her close friend and colleague. After a few rings, Rachel answered, concern evident in her voice. "Sandra, is everything okay?" "No, Rachel, it's not okay. You won't believe what just happened," Sandra said, her voice trembling with emotion. "What happened? Are you all right?" Rachel pressed, alarm evident in her tone. "I announced my promotion at our anniversary dinner, and it all went downhill from there." Mrs. Davis exploded, and then Mark, he hit me. Silence hung in the air as Rachel processed the information. "Oh my God, Sandra, are you hurt?" she asked, her voice rising with concern. "I'm fine physically, but emotionally I don't know," Sandra admitted, feeling the weight of despair. "It's like everything I believed about our marriage has just crumbled. Listen, you need to get out of that situation. You don't deserve to be treated like that," Rachel said firmly, her words cutting through Sandra's haze of confusion. "I know, but it's complicated. We've been together for years," Sandra replied, her voice shaky. Rachel's supportive words were a lifeline, urging Sandra to confront the painful reality of her situation. It was time to reevaluate her life, prioritize her well-being, and take steps toward reclaiming her identity and future. Sandra had believed she and Mark were happy together, but after her traumatic anniversary dinner, the reality of her situation began to sink in. As she spoke with Rachel, her close friend, a wave of realization washed over her. The pressure of Mark's expectations and Mrs. Davis's influence had taken a toll on her, leading to her own feelings of loss and isolation within the relationship. Sometimes the people we love can change, especially under pressure, Rachel reminded her gently, urging Sandra to consider what was best for herself moving forward. The conversation sparked something in Sandra. She had sacrificed so much for the sake of her marriage, and now she found herself feeling lost and alone. After a moment of contemplation, she finally said the words that had been swirling in her mind. "I think I need to talk to a divorce attorney." The words felt both foreign and liberating, a declaration that marked the beginning of her reclaiming her life. "Do it. I'll be here for you every step of the way," Rachel assured her. "You deserve to find happiness." After hanging up, Sandra experienced a mix of fear and determination. The thought of pursuing divorce terrified her, yet it also filled her with a sense of empowerment. She recognized that making such a significant decision was essential for her to reclaim her life and identity. The next morning, Sandra woke up with a heavy heart but a clearer mind. She dialed the number of a divorce attorney Rachel had recommended. "Hello, my name is Sandra. I need to file for divorce," she stated as soon as the call connected. The attorney, a middle-aged woman named Karen, responded with professionalism and warmth. "Understood. Can you come in this afternoon to discuss the details?" "Yes, I'll be there," Sandra replied, hanging up with a newfound sense of resolve. She was taking control of her life, one step at a time. At work, Sandra tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy despite the emotional weight she carried from the previous night. During their morning meeting, her boss, Mr. Roberts, noticed her distraction. "Sandra, is everything all right? You seem a bit off today," he asked gently. "I'm dealing with some personal issues, but I'll manage," she replied, forcing a smile to mask her turmoil. Mr. Roberts's voice was filled with understanding as he said, "You know you can talk to me if you need to." Grateful for his support, Sandra appreciated having allies at work who cared about her well-being. Later that day, Rachel surprised Sandra with lunch. "I thought you could use a break," she said, sliding into the chair across from her. "How did the meeting with the attorney go?" "I haven't gone yet," Sandra admitted. "I'm nervous about what's next." "Just take it one day at a time. You're stronger than you think, Sandra," Rachel encouraged. Her words ignited a glimmer of hope within Sandra. As the afternoon wore on, she buried herself in her work, focusing on spreadsheets, numbers, and analyses to keep her mind occupied amid the emotional turmoil. Finally, the time came for her appointment with the attorney. Taking a deep breath, Sandra stepped into Karen's office, her heart pounding. Karen greeted her with a warm smile, her tone both professional and empathetic. "Let's get started. Tell me what's been going on." Sandra shared her story, detailing the emotional and physical struggles she had faced in her marriage. As she spoke, she felt a sense of empowerment growing within her. She was no longer just a victim, but a woman taking action to change her life. "It sounds like you've made the right choice for yourself," Karen said. "You deserve to be in a healthy, supportive environment." Her words resonated deeply with Sandra. After the meeting, she left the office feeling a mix of anxiety and exhilaration. She had taken a significant step toward reclaiming her life, realizing that the path ahead would be challenging but manageable. She was determined to no longer be defined by someone else's expectations. Instead, she was ready to find her voice, strength, and freedom. The weeks that followed the anniversary dinner were a whirlwind of emotions and hard decisions. After her meeting with Karen, Sandra began the difficult process of detaching her life from Mark's. Each day felt like a battle between dread and hope, a constant struggle between her fears and her determination to reclaim her identity. At work, Sandra poured herself into her projects, using the momentum of her recent promotion to prove herself, not only to her colleagues but to herself as well. Mr. Roberts continued to check in on her. "Sandra, you're doing excellent work. If you need to talk, I'm here," he said one afternoon. "Thanks, Mr. Roberts. I appreciate your support," Sandra replied, feeling grateful for his understanding. One evening, Rachel texted Sandra with an invitation. "Let's celebrate your new beginning. How about drinks this weekend?" The message brought a smile to Sandra's face. She needed this. A chance to escape and feel normal again. "Absolutely. I could use some fun," she replied, excitement bubbling within her. That Saturday, they met at a lively bar downtown. The warm atmosphere and the rush of energy enveloped Sandra as she walked in. Rachel waved from a corner table, and as Sandra joined her, she felt the weight of the past few weeks starting to lift. "Cheers to new beginnings," Rachel exclaimed, raising her glass. "Cheers to new beginnings," Sandra echoed, clinking her glass against Rachel's. They chatted about work, Sandra's promotion, and her aspirations for the future. She revealed her plan to start a mentorship program for young women in finance, expressing her desire to help them navigate challenges similar to those she had faced. "That's a brilliant idea. You'd be an amazing mentor," Rachel encouraged. As the night progressed, Sandra felt lighter, more like her true self. The laughter and connection with Rachel reignited her spirit and reminded her of the passions and dreams she had almost forgotten. The following week, Sandra met with Helen, an industry contact who had invited her to speak at an upcoming conference. "I'm so glad you decided to join us, Sandra. Your story can inspire many," Helen said as they settled into a cafe. "I hope so. I want to empower others to find their voice," Sandra replied, feeling a surge of determination. As the conference date approached, Sandra carefully prepared her speech, weaving in the lessons she had learned. The night before, she practiced in front of the mirror, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. This was her chance to share her journey and empower others to reclaim their lives, just as she was beginning to reclaim her own. On the day of the conference, Sandra felt the weight of the moment as she walked onto the stage. The room was filled with women, all eager to hear her story, and her heart raced with anticipation and nerves. However, as she began to speak, a profound sense of purpose enveloped her. "I stand here today as a survivor," she began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. "I am someone who has faced a storm and emerged stronger." She opened up about her journey, sharing the struggles and hardships she had faced during her marriage to Mark, the emotional toll it had taken on her, and how she had fought to reclaim her identity. As she spoke, she noticed the audience nodding in understanding, their faces reflecting shared experiences and emotions. "I know what it's like to feel trapped, to think that your dreams don't matter. But your voice matters, and you deserve to pursue your passions," she emphasized, her conviction growing stronger with each word. When she finally finished, the applause was thunderous, echoing in her ears as she felt overwhelmed with emotion. After her speech, women approached her one by one, sharing their stories of struggle and resilience. They thanked her for her honesty and for providing a voice to experiences that many felt silenced by. In that moment, Sandra realized she was not alone in her struggles, and the connection with these women filled her with hope and a renewed sense of purpose. In the days that followed, Sandra dedicated herself to planning her mentorship program, reaching out to local universities and organizations eager to connect with young women who were ready to carve their paths in finance. As she immersed herself in this new venture, she felt invigorated and empowered. She was no longer just Sandra, defined by someone else's expectations. She was Sandra, a mentor, a leader, and a voice for change. Despite her professional successes, Mark continued to reach out, desperate to repair the damage their relationship had sustained. He sent texts and called, but Sandra ignored him, focusing instead on her newfound purpose. She was learning to set boundaries, valuing her well-being above all else. One night, she received a message from Laura, a mutual friend. "Mark's been asking about you. He says he regrets everything." Sandra felt a heaviness in her heart, but responded resolutely. It's too late for that. She had moved on and was ready for whatever came next. As the months passed, Sandra found her footing in this new chapter of her life. Her mentorship program gained traction, and she began connecting with young women who were eager to forge their paths in finance. This renewed sense of purpose was something she hadn't felt in a long time. One Saturday, she hosted the first meeting of the program at a cozy local cafe. As she looked around at the eager faces of the participants, excitement rushed through her. "Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here," she began, her voice steady. "Today, we'll share our stories and discuss the challenges we face in our careers." The discussions were vibrant and heartfelt, with each woman sharing her experiences. Sandra realized how powerful their connections could be. She was no longer just telling her story, but she was also helping others find their voices. After the meeting, a young woman named Mia approached her, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you for creating this space. I've been struggling to find my place in this industry," she said. "That's exactly why I started this program," Sandra replied with a warm smile. "You belong here, and we'll support each other." With each meeting, Sandra grew more confident in her role as a mentor. As she thrived professionally, opportunities began to open up for her. Helen, the industry contact who had first invited her to speak, invited her to another conference, and Sandra eagerly accepted. This time, she felt less nervous and more empowered, ready to share not just her struggles, but also her triumphs. While preparing for her speech, Sandra reflected on how far she had come. She no longer felt like the woman who had been trapped in a toxic relationship or one who had faced public humiliation. She was Sandra, a woman who had risen from the ashes, determined to make a difference for herself and others. When the day of the conference arrived, she stepped onto the stage with a familiar flutter of nerves, but this time it was accompanied by excitement. "Today, I want to talk about resilience and the power of community, she began, her voice resonating through the room. Together, we can overcome anything. The applause that followed was overwhelming, and as she absorbed the energy of the audience, she realized she was not just speaking, she was connecting. She had transformed her pain into strength and was using it to uplift others. As she drove home that day, a deep sense of fulfillment washed over her. While her past was still a part of her, it no longer defined her. She was building a life on her own terms, filled with purpose and hope, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Sandra felt confident that she possessed the strength to face it all.